And now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Dr. David Lindsted is the founder of Readiness Analytics. He is the creator of the RPC model of organizational recoverability and author of Measuring Preparedness and Predicting Recoverability. Dr. Lindsted has presented at numerous conferences and has published several articles in international journals. He has taught continuity planning at Norwich University and currently serves on the editorial board for the Journal of Business Continuity and Emergency Management. After Dr. Lindsted's presentation, we will be hearing from Bill Shera. Bill is the Everbridge Learning Officer and also focuses on worldwide best practices. He works on Everbridge University, our learning management system, and Everbridge Best Practices Collateral. He has worked in training and technology in the high-tech industry for over 25 years. His expertise is in instructional design, course development, learning assessment, and course delivery. He is a doctoral candidate at Walden University and is focusing on educational technology and adult mobile learning in the corporate environment. We are excited and honored to have both of our speakers here with us today. And now I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter. Dr. Lindsted, you may begin.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to make sure you can see my screen. Let's go full screen. Very good. So, welcome everybody. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's go ahead and get started. I think most professionals and practitioners will agree that ISO 22301 is a good step forward for the industry. It's a big improvement over NFPA 1600, especially for business continuity. It boasts a simple glossary and brings together many of the best practices in the industry. It's clearly getting a lot of interest, and many organizations are moving to adopt it. What I want to highlight here is the fact that organizations are using it as evidence of their ability to recover from disaster. And what is of particular interest is that organizations are using it for their partners, their vendors, their supply chain members as a litmus test for recoverability. So I wonder a bit about that evidence. I wonder a bit about how much confidence we should have. What does it mean in terms of recoverability that an organization is ISO 22301 certified? Let me begin with just this hypothetical and say, if you learn that one of your critical supply chain vendors is ISO 22301 certified, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? What does that mean in terms of recoverability? What does that mean in terms of your confidence? We're going to talk about three different sections. We're going to start with a flaw in our thinking as we apply it to standards like ISO 22301, and a flaw which may get us into trouble. We're going to talk about a gap in the process, which may lead to a gap in the defenses as we look at some of the criteria and the evaluation of ISO 22301. And then I'm going to provide some thoughts and suggestions on what to do about it. Now, this isn't a sky is falling, call to arms kind of a presentation. In some ways, I wish it were. The topic is a subtle and complex one. The goals for today are to try and increase the awareness about what it means to be ISO 22301 certified and gain some maturity and some sophistication as you start to look at inside your organization and outside of your organization for that certification. Before we begin, let's try and get a quick definition of what it means to be ISO 22301 certified. Basically, there is an accredited certification body that comes into your or to the organization. They do an audit. And they are confirming that the scope of your business continuity management system, essentially your business continuity or ITDR program, is compliant with the things that are set out in ISO 22301, with no major findings, though some minor findings might be allowed. And look, this is just my summary. This particular list doesn't appear anywhere in ISO 22301. We're going to see lots of quotes from them, but this isn't one of them. So the first section then is a flaw in our thinking. And I think what happens is we typically want to ask the question, If someone is certified, yes or no, then are they recoverable? Yes or no? And I'm going to argue that recoverability is never a matter of yes or no. It is always a matter of degree. Let's take a few examples. Imagine we have a help desk. And imagine the organization in which that help desk resides has undergone a significant physical and staffing loss or incident. And now what we have for the help desk is 3 people with laptops, internet access, and cell phones at Panera. Did the help desk recover? Well, it didn't not recover. We've got people on some phones. We've got people on some laptops. We're communicating to some degree with our customers. It's not what we maybe expected if we have 12 people and we're moving them over to another off-site, which is no longer available to us. So did they recover? Yeah, no. I don't know how to answer that. Another question, another situation, scenario. Our payroll system is also affected by the disaster. It is up and running within 8 hours, but it's read-only. We can't get any new information in it. Now, did the payroll system recover? Yes. It didn't not recover. It's up. It's running. It was 8 hours instead of the 4 hours that I hoped. I can get some information in, but I can't get all information in. I can get it out, but I can't get it in. So did it recover? Take one more example. Suppose the organization was developing a new flagship product, and it has now lost 9 months to bring that product to market. In addition, we took a black eye to the brand for the way that we handled our recovery. It took us 32% of our capital to bring us back up and bail us out of the recovery. We expect a sales reduction, and a quarter of our staff has left. Did the organization survive? Yes or no? Well, yes, but what happens in 2 years if the organization goes to 50% of its former profits? Is it still the same company? Did it survive? In what ways did it survive? This isn't a yes and no question. Andy Andrews, who is a writer, thinker, and presenter on success, has this quote, which I find very helpful, which is that the quality of our answers are going to depend on the quality of our questions. We need to stop asking these yes and no questions about recoverability, preparedness, and survival, and the like. Recoverability is going to be a matter of degree. And in fact, I got a little asterisk there. It's not entirely a matter of degree. It's a matter of time and degree. When we look at any process, function, procedure, organization, system, IT system, we're going to look at the degree that we want it to be back up and running and the time in which we want it to be back up and running. So if we're going to ask questions about recoverability, about preparedness, these aren't yes and no questions. We need to look at the services, the functions. We need to find out to what degree. Is 3 people at a Panera with internet access enough or not enough? Or what do we mean by that degree and what kind of a time frame? And then we need to measure that on the back end after the disaster to see if we met those targets of time and degree. Quick sidetrack. How did we get here? How did we get to looking at survivability, recoverability, certification, ISO 22301 in terms of yes and no? I'm going to argue for 3 sources for fun. Take it or leave it as you wish. It's a bit of a rabbit hole. One is that, as we know, or at least we're told, business continuity comes out of IT disaster recovery, particularly in the 1980s, one could argue. When it's a kinder, simpler, gentler time with mainframes that are a bit more yes or no in terms of whether they're up, much less complicated upstream and downstream dependencies, much less complicated systems. Compliance. Compliance typically is a matter of yes and no things. We need to measure things that are binary. Either this thing is or it isn't. Either you've got one or you don't have one. And ISO, by and large, lends itself to that sort of a mindset. And let us not forget execu-speak. Do you want to take time to explain the nuances of recoverability to your executives? Typically, they don't have time, and they don't often have the patience for it. But it's going to be our challenge to be able to try and shift the conversation from, is this organization ready to recover from disaster, to what degree is this organization able to recover from disaster? By the way, speaking of rabbit holes real quick, this is very much backed up in new research, new publications about decision-making and about cognitive processing, particularly the Decisive book with the RAP process, talking about absolutely getting out of yes, no, binary options, widening your options. So let me return to the hypothetical example. You learn that one of your critical supply chain vendors is now ISO 22301 certified. What does that mean? What does that mean to you? What does that mean in terms of your confidence? Okay, so we say, look, we're going to move beyond yes and no. We know better now. We're going to ask better questions, Andy Anders. And so let's look to ISO 22301. And in fact, there's a lot of language in there about measurement and evaluation. And so maybe we can find something in there. I think we end up with our big gap. However, and let me try and walk us through the gap that I see as we try and turn to the standard itself. Now let's review the steps. Clearly this is my language, not their language. But as we go through ISO 22301 and what it tells us to do to set up our business continuity management system, really fast, essentially we got to figure out what the organization needs in terms of this system. We got to get leadership to buy in and support it. We've got to set one up with an organizational structure. We got to get adequate support and awareness and staffing and resources. Then we run the program, and now we get to, I think, what most of us sort of understand as doing the work. On more familiar terms, look, we have operations. Okay, somebody needs to be in charge doing these types of things. We've got our BIA and our RA. Oh, good. We're back on familiar ground again. We need our goals and our appetites and our continuity planning. That's where the rubber meets the road, and we figure out how we're going to recover following a disaster. Okay. Now this is the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, as are many ISO standards, very familiar. And so we're going to plan and we're going to do, and now it's time to check. Well, what are we checking? What does the standard tell us to check? All right, well, first of all, you want to evaluate the effectiveness of the program. Essentially, that means, do you have leadership? Is there awareness? Do you have support? Are things going well? Are you doing this Plan, Do, Check, Act process? That's not our current topic right now. The second is, well, you need to make sure your supply chain vendors, those people supporting the program and your organization from outside, you need to make sure that they are capable. How do we do that? I presume we tell them to go get ISO 22301 certified. So that brings us back to 9.1.2, evaluation of business continuity procedures. Okay, once we've figured out what we're going to do to recover, we need to evaluate whether or not they're going to work. What do we use for that evaluation? What are the tools that we do for that? Okay, two options according to ISO 22301. Internal audit, and if I hear a collective groan, then I shall ignore it for the moment, but perhaps you share some of my concerns as well. Typically, the internal audit people are doing a bang-up job with way too much to do and too few resources, and they're typically not experts, subject matter experts, at emergency management, or ITDR, or business continuity. They're subject matter experts at auditing. And so they are not going to know what to look for. They are not going to know what to measure. They are not going to know sort of to bring a context to the measure. I mean, sure, there will be exceptions, but by and large, they're going to have to look towards some sort of thing to find out what to measure. Well, great. Well, what are they going to measure? Well, I'm guessing they're going to look back at the standard and they're going to say, okay, did you figure out what the organization needs? Did you get leadership support? Oh, I see you have a stakeholder group. You have a committee meeting. You have an adequate program. You have 3 staff members. Oh, there's your BIA. There's your risk assessment. There's your recoverability plans. Everything looks good. I'm worried about using ISO 22301 to certify ISO 22301 in terms of recoverability, in terms of preparedness, in terms of the evaluation of business continuity procedures, section 9.1.2. Well, okay. Maybe we agree then with Forbes' article from a few months ago that says, well, look, we recognize that you can pass an audit and still not be prepared to recover. So what do we need to do? Tests and exercises. And ISO 22301 supports that. Very good. We'll do business continuity tests and exercises. I'm surprised I don't see this article mentioned more often. This is from a 2008 article from RAND by Brian Jackson on exactly this problem of measuring preparedness. And although it's bad to have a lot of text on the screen, don't read it now, read it later if you wish. But the point being is that standards are pretty good at telling us how to set things up. And often, and in fact, one of the things that these standards often rely on is testing and exercising. Look, it's hard to count things that are hard to count. And so what we typically look to are things like, how many plans do we have? When were those plans last updated? Did we have an exercise? When was the last time we had that exercise? And in fact, I have some serious concerns about tests and exercises. I typically think they are not detailed, complex, sophisticated enough. They typically don't have the right people at the table. They typically cover the first few hours following a disaster and don't go on into recovery, reconstitution, what NIST SP 834 calls reconstitution, and bringing everything back to a state of new normal. And what are they measuring? Typically, they're measuring when we had one, who was there, what are the 3 action items that came out of this. Now, clearly there are exceptions. If you want to say, look, we did an unannounced takedown of our entire production system, which we brought up within minutes at our recovery center with no hiccups, everything is back up and running fine, that's probably a pretty good test. But I think what we typically encounter are tabletop exercises and read-throughs and call trees, and I think it's a gamble. I don't think these are a particularly good measure of recoverability or preparedness. So I bring you back a second time to our hypothetical. You learn that one of your supply chain vendors is ISO 22301 certified. What does that mean? What does that mean to you? What does that mean for recoverability? What does that mean for confidence? Now, I began to think at this point I was seriously asking way too much of the standard. Perhaps this isn't sort of what the standard was supposed to be about. But in the first few sentences of the first section, it really is about societal security. It really is about being able to address and recover from disruptive incidents. So this gets to a larger concern, a much larger concern for our industry, which is how do we measure preparedness? How do we measure recoverability? What I'm going to talk about now for the next few minutes, everything I'm going to show you is available for you to use right away. And I hope that you will try it and use it right away. Everything's public that I'm going to show you. There's an iTunes Universities course. There are videos. There are other materials. Naturally, if you need a jump start, there are some commercial bits available. If you don't like this solution, awesome. Find another one. Figure out how to measure preparedness, how to address Section 9.1.2 of the ISO standard. This is my shot at it. I think you need 3 things to be able to recover from a significant physical or staffing loss. And here, I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole, but we're not talking about resilience. We're talking about recovery from a significant physical or staffing loss. And the 3 things that I need first are resources. I'm going to need some stuff. That might be simple. That might be I go to Staples and I grab a laptop and I get it up and running at the Panera and I'm good. That may be quite complicated. I may need an NMRI. I may need special plastic injectors and molding machines. I may need things that only I have one of and I built it from scratch. Either way, I'm going to need some stuff. I'm also going to need to know what to do with it. Following the disaster, who's in charge? Where are we going? Where's the command center? Who's got communications? Who writes the communications? Who authorizes the communications? Who's doing a damage assessment? Where are we going? When we get there, what are we doing? Who's setting up the environmentals? What are the processes and procedures for getting the recovery if I don't have the usual people, resources, time, and money, etc.? The third, crisis competencies. This is being able to lead, to act, to serve during and throughout the crisis, as opposed to, say, running out of the building, screaming, and going home and hiding under the covers. What's interesting to me is that this is very much language which is already in ISO 22301. They don't pull it together in this particular way. They don't sort of cross-reference it in this particular way, but the language is very much in keeping with the spirit and the direction of ISO 22301. These three factors will demarcate your preparedness and your recoverability. By the way, preparedness and recoverability, not the same thing. That will take us down another interesting avenue, but we don't have time for that one today. But looking at these three factors and making them into the demarcation for preparedness, for recoverability, allows us then to say, at time of disaster, the more of these three things that you have ready to go, the better off you're going to be. And we can look at quantitative numbers of preparedness in terms of time and degree. What does that mean? Remember, the heart of what you're doing in the business continuity planning, IT disaster recovery planning, is in section 8.4 of the standard, those business continuity plans. That standard talks about 4 procedures, 4 phases, right? Incident response, which is the first few hours, if you will, following the disaster. Warning and communication, which sort of runs underneath these phases, both pre and during the disaster. Service continuity, bringing your processes, functions back up into continuing them or recovering them. And then again, what NIST calls reconstitution, but the recovery, the getting us back to a state of new normal. And because each one of these can be measured, each of the 4 procedures can be evaluated. And so now we have the ability to work through section 9.1.2. I will not go into detail. Trust me, we worked it out. We've got the details for how you would work through this kind of a thing. Those details are available to you right now. But what this means is, again, we can look at section 9.1.2. We can look at the spirit of what we're trying to capture here, which is the evaluation of business continuity procedures, or IT disaster recovery procedures, or preparedness, and give scores to each of these 3 factors and look at the limits and look at the degree and the matters of time that we have. Again, recoverability, a matter of degree. We don't want to ask the question, is the business recoverable? Is the organization recoverable? We want to ask the question, to what degree is it recoverable? And so, I return you a last time to our hypothetical. You learn that one of your supply chain vendors is now ISO 22301 certified. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to you as a professional as you look to the welfare and continuity of your organization? What does that mean inside of your organization? What does that mean for that vendor that was certified? What does that mean for your confidence in how well you should sleep at night? So we talked about a flaw in the thinking. Recoverability, not a matter of yes or no, always a matter of degree, and how we can correct that immediately. We can stop thinking about these certifications at one level, at an important level, in terms of yes or no and binary. We talked about a gap in the process. Clearly there is a certification procedure, and clearly there are a lot of good things about it. Again, this isn't a sky is falling presentation. But let's get to a different level of maturity and sophistication as we look at what these mean, and we look to see what it means to evaluate our business continuity procedures. And I've given you some thoughts which I hope you will implement immediately to help your organization. I leave you with two thinkers, one being Plato, and Plato, of course, saying, know thyself. Know what this means to your organization. Know what it means to you as a business continuity planner. Know what the limits of ISO 22301 are and what that means. The other, of course, is Donald Rumsfeld with his known knowns, his known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And what I mean by that in putting it here is hopefully we have decreased some of your unknown unknowns and moved them into the category of known unknowns. And by that I mean you now know what to look for and the kinds of questions to ask and not to accept a blanket certification depending on the nature and importance of your vendor and the nature and importance of your organization as a blank litmus test for recoverability. And with that, I turn it back over to Everbridge.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lindstad. I'd like to follow and go in just a little bit more in a smaller area. Let's look at one gap. In ISO 22301, sections 8.4.2 is incident response. And it talks about how do you handle those first few hours of a disaster. The second part, 8.4.4, is how do you get your processes and services running again? The gap between them is what Dr. Lindstad talked about in warning and communication. This is a fairly extensive area where we'll be covering implementation, detection, monitoring, tracking, and the dissemination of information. It underlies both, as Dr. Lindstad had said, in that it should be done before, planned before, and established before as the warnings are coming in, and it should be continuing throughout the entire process. If we take a look at Dr. Lindstad's RPC model of recoverability, what I'd like to do is take the three sections. We talked about resources, the stuff, equipment, hardware, software, staffing. We discussed procedures, and that could include assessments, communication that's being there, how do you establish the services again, what are the processes you're following, and competency. Do they know what to do with what they have? What I'd like to suggest is the resources that you use may help you establish procedures and ease the competency level that's required. It can help you establish and enforce your warning and communication procedures and make it easier for your team to achieve the competency they need and plug gaps that may exist. Let's take a look at one example. A key area is how do you find the right people to notify and mobilize? If you've got scheduling software that's maintaining information that's live, maintaining information up to the moment this person is sick, they're going to leave, you can first identify the best group, or in a lot of cases, groups that are going to be set with the right skills and who's on call and who could be available. You could then automatically notify these team members and then confirm that they've received the information. Now the key to this is this automation saves you valuable time as opposed to getting your paper sheets out, spreadsheets, determining who to call, and then trying the notification software or some tree that's there. You've got the information, you're able to go out and communicate with these people and save the time. Your procedures are established and the resource is helping you. At a higher level, you also have the case of escalation. How can you make sure that you're getting a response, and what happens if you don't? The software should be able to provide for you a way to slowly drill. Your local triage officers haven't responded, you could send it to the next team. And then send it to another team after that that's off duty but still there. It gives you the ability to have a global delivery that can be set out to your teams and reports to establish accountability. How do you know who answered? Well, the key is with reporting that's running simultaneously with the escalation that takes place, you're able to now start to gauge what's taking place, and it gives you metrics to determine who handled it. You've got the ability to see what was received, who received the call, and the times that are involved as this goes. This is all information that's necessary if you're going to refine resource use, competency training, or your procedures. You could also need to transition from a local to a more global situation with massive accidents, pandemics, outbreaks of different kinds, emergencies that are there. In the corporate world, you've got exactly the same issues, where a local problem that occurs with an outage or business continuity has issues that force you to be able to reach out to everyone to let them know what's happening. A volcano may be stopping people from flying. People not being able to fly may not be able to make it to a special show that's there, and you've got to warn everybody ahead of time. Also, you want to be able to reach your people. And the key here, multimodal, for those who aren't used to the word, just multiple devices that are used to reach them. Phone, SMS, email, mobile push that's there. The idea is you can have the methods established and sequentially go through them. When one succeeds, it's confirmed, it stops. But if not, we continue to try to reach the person. And this is done automatically after you've set it up. In addition, you've got the ability now with smartphones and others, mobile, one of the things you remember I was studying at school, with the mobile devices that are there, to send out a message, but now get information back. What state is the person in? Are they able to help? Yes, they're outside the area, but they can help. And what's more, they can give you information about what's going on in that locale, first-hand information, and hopefully from people that you can trust to give you more information about how to handle this, passing it on, and developing. A unified platform helps in that it's one resource, and it allows you to have a single source for warning and communication software. If you think about it, it can speed up communication with effective messages, templates, text-to-speech, escalation, scheduling features like we talked, the variety of devices. All of those things can help you speed up the communication and plan and prepare. In addition, if you learn and maintain one platform, it's a lot easier than multiple platforms, multiple registrations and logins, and user interfaces. These factors can make the competency acquisition a lot easier for your team. Another key thing, and one that's near and dear to my heart, we talked a little bit about testing and what Dr. David had said as he was going through, but it's important to test to make sure what you think you've got planned actually can work and take place and be set up. You have to test to be sure your resources and your competencies can support your procedures. When the test occurs, does each team member, each group, get the information they need? Are all the key stakeholders notified? Can you document, check, evaluate what you've planned and what you've done, and then act to correct it? Can you plan, do, check, and act to be able to get that information and to be able to evaluate it? You want to make sure that this is done before something bad happens, before the event takes place. When the event takes place, there are a lot of other factors that will come into play. Dr. Chandler talks about all the things that occur when there are problems that are being set up, the intelligence levels of people dropping, the message net needed to be clearer, the possibility of things that go wrong, things that can occur will. An example of a case where it went correctly, University of New Haven was using a mobile application to get the information that they needed during a shooter incident. They had a campus lockdown, and when the reports of the person with the gun were there, they sent out the information to everyone about alerting the faculty, students, to shelter in place until further notice. The quicker you can get the message out, literally the more people who might be saved that are there. At one site, they sent out a test message, and the test message forgot to mention that it was a test, and it said there was a shooter in the area. The people who were the most angry were the students who didn't get the message. They sent back and saying, we could have been out there and been killed. We didn't get the message. You know, you'd imagine that those who got a test message would be more upset. But no, it was the ones who didn't get the message. Because the key is, in a life or death situation, you've got to make sure your procedures work, your people are competent, and the resources perform what you need. The last part, in being a trainer at heart, I can't resist, is have your training available. Break it down into the roles your team is expected to perform, and as procedural as possible so they can quickly see what's taking place. Track who's been trained. The less structured you have this, the more danger there is of people falling through holes, of not being able to really understand what to do, and in an emergency, that can be deadly. You can use a combination. On-site, regularly scheduled training can be customized to meet your specific needs. Online training, for example here I'm just showing of a learning management system. Online training can be taken anytime. So with a situation where your people have various different schedules, different shifts they come in, you're able to let them get the training when they can. If it's SAS offered and you can get it through the internet, any place. I had one group that was taking their courses at Starbucks. And at any pace. One of the keys is a lot of time in training, it goes too fast for people to pick it up. With online training, you can repeat it, see it again, watch what's there, and review it for just-in-time training that you want to have established. And probably the best, I don't have it on the screen, but probably the best of all of those things would be, I've got the ability to blend my training. In that case, they can watch the standardized training that's there, and then go into a situation where it's purely hands-on, going in and doing the actual activity. For a lot of partner groups, this is really critical. Billable time is extremely important. So they've got the ability to learn on their time, and then when they come in, they've got the expert in front of them, and they're in there learning the kind of things that hands-on exercises will only do. Sending messages, it is much more comfortable after you've done it than when you have to do it the first time in front of someone. So you're able to train it and see it and have it come through. So in that one area we talked about as far as the communication and the planning that's there, those are some things you can think about to use the model and to drive it forward. I can't resist adding one other thing that's here. Being a trainer and loving free things, I was very happy to see that Dr. Lundsted's website, when you go there, you're able to take an iTunes University course free. And it's an extensive course. There are multiple modules that are there, and they walk you through the process to let you see what takes place and to talk to you in more detail than even we saw today about how that formula works and how could you answer the question, will we survive? Will we recover? And again, it's free, and you're able to do it. So I would strongly suggest you take advantage of that. Okay. Can I return it back to you, Erin?
Great. Thank you so much. So at this point, we're going to open it up to questions from our audience. As a reminder, you may submit your questions by typing your question into the open text field and submitting to all panelists. And we will answer as many questions as time allows. So let me just get Dr. Lundstedt back on the line because I know there are some questions for him. So let's see. Our first question is for Dr. Lundstedt. Is this process of % recoverability translatable from other standards to ISO 22301?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is getting at. So if it's how you can, how do you measure recoverability, how do you measure preparedness, then I sort of see that as absolutely standard neutral and methodology neutral, right? The question is, what are the things that you're going to need to be able to recover from disaster? Do you have them? Do you have them in terms of competencies, in terms of resources, in terms of procedures, and being able to measure that? So I sort of see that as a plug-in to any sort of different kind of methodology that you might be looking at. The only caution is I want to keep it nice and narrow to recovering from a significant physical or staffing loss. And again, I don't want to get into a lot of detail, but there is another movement inside of the industry now to look at resilience. And to look at that in sort of very large terms, and measuring that is going to be another challenge within the industry as well, but sort of a different angle, a different look at things. So if I came close to getting the spirit of the question, I think the answer is certainly yes. I think it's sort of agnostic and can be used in different kinds of standards that you might need. Certainly, as we talked about NIST, we talked about, obviously, ISO. We could look at 27001, Section 14, is it? And some of those types of things.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Linstead. This one is for you as well. It comes from an asker who says that they're not totally familiar with ISO 22301. However, they are very familiar with ISO 9000 and 9001. So their question is, are you measuring recoverability as a process, or are you measuring the individual elements outlined by the standard as a baseline?
I think you're wanting to measure. So, I think the answer is you can scale it to whatever degree of precision that you need. We can look at the organization as a whole, and we can ask some extremely large-scale questions to say, okay, look, in general, do we have the kinds of resources? Do we know kinds of the things that we would do? Do we know, do our people have the competencies to be able to do them? We can drill that down very deep, right? We can go to a specific process within a specific department of the organization. We can look to every one of these factors, not just the second, but the third tier factors in great detail, and we can say, all right, let's start with laptops. How many laptops do we need to recover this particular? What do they need to have on them? Do we have them? Where are they? Do people know how to use them? Have they used them in a crisis setting before? And go from there. We can work ad nauseum into all of the details as we need it. Typically, you're going to get a really good indication at something like the second level. I only want to speak to ISO 22301. I don't want to try and get too far into 9000. I think there's some tie-ins to 27001, but I don't want to speak too far afield off of 22301.
Great, thank you. So this next one I think is for Bill. What consideration is given to emergency alerting via iPOS, which includes emergency alert system broadcast, WEA to cell phones, and other government alerting methods that are using standard protocols like CAP?
Very important, and unfortunately in some cases it'll be blocked with iOS. But it's an area that everyone has got to bring in. Tablets are becoming the most popular method that's being set up. Mobile has surpassed sales for laptops that are there. So yeah, it's very critical to be there, to be able to have the information coming from weather alerts, from others, and being able to set it up.
Great. And this one I think I'll field to both of you. What type of exercise would you recommend to be conducted with mission-critical departments to make sure they can be recovered without disrupting their everyday production work? So, Dr. Linstead, if we start with you.
Look, I mean, I think the answer is sort of common sense. It's as detailed and complex and rigorous as you possibly could make it based on what you need to know. If you need to be very certain that leadership has the same sense of mission, that leadership has the same sense of priorities and sense of recovery time, if you need to know which systems are connected with which other systems and how they share their data, if you need Are they going to leave the room? What are they doing when they're leaving the room? Are they going home if they are going to go? Does the telephone in the recovery center have a speakerphone on it? These are the types of things you're not going to learn without doing some very complex, very detailed exercises. How you do that without interrupting production is very difficult. Obviously, there is an inverse relationship to the depth of the testing and exercising that you need versus the amount that you're going to interrupt production systems and production functions.
I'd only add to that, you've got in your procedures what you want to have tested to a degree. That's going to be set up. You can do small, if you will, limited tests, but Dr. Lindstad's correct. You must do a major test that's there. You must go through the entire process and see what's happening, what's taking place, and what worked and what didn't work. If you're going to have a conference call to bring all the leadership together and the conference number doesn't work, it's much better to find that out before the crisis occurs. If you suddenly discover that resources are not in place, or in one case I saw a situation where two people were arguing about whose job it was to handle a particular part in the middle of the crisis. Much better to get that done in a test, and it's expensive. It can cause difficulty in resources, just as Dr. Lindstad had said, but you really should be testing to see what's there. If you send out notifications and quite a percentage of what you've sent out are numbers that are no longer in use or incorrect, you want to know that before there's a crisis. So I would agree, as close as possible to what you're expecting to see. You should have objectives that you can measure that let you know whether or not you're successful.
Great. So this question, I think, is for you as well, Bill. How do you measure the effectiveness of an IT-based communication system during an IT type of disaster?
Yeah, I would imagine. I'll have Dr. Lindstad jump in on this too, but I would imagine one of the difficulties there is the fact that I might be testing to see what happens if the outage involves it. So if you're using an external system for your communication, like I showed a SAS-based one that's there, well then you could be undergoing outages in your area, but that system should be redundant enough and for you to be able to use it. So in a sense, while you're testing internally, you've also got the backup system that's there that can communicate and get the messages through while you're trying to repair the parts that aren't working.
I'll give you an answer, but I don't think it's a good answer. But I think Bill's much more qualified to answer this question. I think, again, I'll default to the model, and I would say if you're trying to figure out a particular function, and so the function is something like we want to be able to notify a certain number of people within a certain time frame, which we're going to measure by a certain degree criteria of success. Then I think you apply the three factors. Oops, sorry. That's not good. You apply the three factors, and you want to look at, do I have the resources to be able to do that communications? Do I have the phone that I need? Do I have the automatic notifications? Do I have, and then I look at the procedures. Does the person know how to type out the message? Do they know how to use the system? Do they know how to use the automatic notifications? Do they know what message to send and who to authorize it and how to do those types of things? And then can they do it under stress? And do we all agree on the priorities? And do we have a good sense of teamwork and leadership? So I would sort of look at those three criteria as far as a sort of a knee-jerk answer goes.
Great, thank you. And this one is also for you, Dr. Lindstad. Do you agree that a major problem with ISO 22301 is the fact that it checks conformance to the requirements without checking the validity of the requirements?
Okay, can you repeat that one really again? Because I think that's an interesting question.
Sure. Do you agree that a major problem with ISO 22301 is the fact that it checks conformance to the requirements without checking the validity of the requirements?
How would it check the validity of the requirements? So there's nothing in the standard that's going to check the validity of the standard. So what we're asking is whether or not the types of things that it checks are the types of things that it ought to be checking. And I think it's sort of, we started out, I think it's certainly an improvement. I think it's focused a bit heavy as many standards are, on how to set up things, how to set up a program and get the leadership support and the kinds of broad things that that program ought to be doing. But I think, as the RAND article pointed out and others have pointed out, I think it's a bit light on how do you determine whether that worked. Okay, I have a BIA. Is it a good BIA? Do we all agree to it? I have a risk assessment. Are they the right risks? Is it a detailed risk assessment? I have documents that are my continuity planning documents. Are they any good? Who's looked at them? Have we tried them? Are they the kinds of things that we can use? Are they a big binder that sits on the shelf? What are the kinds of things we're measuring and we're looking at? And so I think to that extent, then it's a bit heavy on the setup and not on the evaluation of effectiveness.
Great, thank you. So this one, Bill, I know you mentioned testing exercises. Is it necessary to include authorities such as emergency management, fire, police, etc., in your testing exercises?
Oh, absolutely. You absolutely should have a scenario that you're following for a couple of reasons. One is each of the scenarios could have varying degrees of what parts of the system that you're going to have to use or come in. If you think about it, a tornado is going to require, excuse me, is going to require a much quicker call to action and getting information out, measured in minutes, than a hurricane where you might have hours or days to start to plan to do. So I definitely would. One of the hard parts with the exercises is to do the work of building the scenarios you're going to have to face. What are the kind of issues that you have to do? And then prioritize them to determine which ones could be there. In a lot of cases, professional services groups can help you to sit down to gather that information together and to help put the scenarios that are in place. Once the scenario is in place, you can begin to work out the details of the exercise.
Okay, and I'll follow up with another question for Bill regarding multimodal. Can each staff member decide which path order of multimodal methods to use? For example, one might want to call on their cell phone first, then a call on their home phone. Another staff member might want to text first, then a call on their cell phone.
I tried to be as careful as I could, not to be, totally Everbridge-centric, but I have to answer this. I work at Everbridge, so I can tell you what we do. And what we do is we allow the user to determine what is the best method to reach them. So if it's SMS, they could say, I want SMS first. And my wife could say, no, I want to receive it on my cell phone. I want to get a call that's there. Someone else could say email. There still might be cases where there's an outage and the major networks are down. So what you want to have is you want to use SMS or a cell phone because text is the only one to get through. You have the ability to override. But when you can, I would use the device order that was given to you. And again, run through it once. And if they haven't responded, you've got the ability to go through the cycle again until you get that confirmation. The idea is you want it confirmed so you don't keep sending them messages, and then you can go on to the next level.
Great. This one is for Dr. Lindstedt. How do you use metrics to justify the resources, people, tools, etc., needed for recoverability and resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what you come up with is a quantitative picture of your preparedness and thereby your recoverability, and that has to go back to senior leadership, and that has to go into their risk appetite. And you can say, look, based on the information we have, your help desk is about 70% prepared, which gives us a recoverability confidence recoverability confidence index of about, say, 15-25%. Is that okay? If that is okay, if that's within your risk appetite, there's not much more to be said there. That is typically the executive management decision. If that is payroll, if that is R&D, if that is accounts receivable, if that is new inquiries, those are the kinds of conversations now we can finally open up. We can do more than look at, okay, we have 27 documents, 50% of them were updated within the last 6 months, and we've done 17 exercises. What does that mean? And now we have a way to say, well, based on our metrics, what it says is that your key payroll system and your payroll process are, say, 82 and 76% ready to recover. What do you want to do with that? Do you want to make it 80%, 90%? Do you want to get it closer to 100%? One of the things that I've seen and was surprised at in using this model, I thought people would be very much turned off by the quantitative numbers at the end. But in fact, they use that and are actually very receptive to them because it gives them a target. And it gives them a very specific idea of the kinds of things that they should be aiming for. And it takes this sort of mysterious and nebulous business continuity into something that's very measurable and say, look, you know what would be good for you? You want to bring up your crisis competency scores? Then do an exercise, do a test. Try and try out some of these processes and perhaps under some not so normal conditions. So to go back to the answer to the question, I think you use that data and you bring that data to the decision makers and you simply lay it out and say, look, I am not confident that these key processes, functions, or systems can be recovered in the time you think they need to be recovered, we think they need to be recovered, and have the discussion that goes from there.
Great. So obviously we have a ton of great questions coming in. I think we have time for just one or two more. Hopefully this one will be fairly easy to answer. Dr. Lindstedt, is ISO 22301 appropriate for any size organization?
Wow. I was not expecting that sort of question. I'm just going to say I don't know. I'm not associated with ISO. I can't sort of say. I would imagine that it's just sort of a matter of what you need. Can you use it? Sure. You can certainly go through those steps. You can certainly apply them to a small and mid-sized business. But I think that's an interesting question about return on investment. And what does that mean? And to some extent, we go back to the question, what does it mean to be certified? If I'm a small company that is a provider to a larger company and they say, you got to go get one of these, well, then I probably got to go get one of them. So I certainly think it can be done. I think it's just a matter of what's the return on investment for doing that.
Great. So I'll ask one more. Bill, I think this is for you. What privacy concerns should we anticipate when putting together a notification system?
There are considerable things that are there. Obviously, in the hospital area with HIPAA, there's a lot of concerns you have to have about confidentiality and making sure that no information about the patient is there. In other cases, a lot of times people will opt in and voluntarily give you information so they can say, I want to opt into yours, please send me the information, and then there should be the ability, you've got the reporting that's there, but it should be in a very limited sense and you should be controlling it. When you start to go outside of the United States, it becomes a little bit more exciting. You might have to worry about where you're storing your information and who's got access to it.
Great, thank you. So unfortunately, I have to announce that we've run out of time, but thank you to both Dr. Lindstedt and Bill for a great session, and to all of our attendees who were able to join us today. If you missed any part of the webinar, be sure to look for the slides on everbridge.com/blog. And you'll also receive an email with a link to the recording in the next few days. If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us on Twitter at Everbridge and join our group on LinkedIn, Everbridge Incident Management and Emergency Notification Professionals. For those of you interested in requesting a demo of the new Everbridge system, please visit everbridge.com/request-demo. So thank you all again for your participation in today's Expert Insights webinar, ISO 22301, A Gap in the Defenses. I will see you all online again soon. Have a wonderful day.